All right. With that, shall we get into video games and movies?
Yes. Yeah, let's give that a go. Let's talk about some video games.
Let's talk about that. Again, I want to say it was episode 179. We talked about this briefly. We did a top 3 video games that we would like to see adapted into film.
Yeah.
Now, since then, well, I guess first let me read off our list.
Okay.
Okay. Some of these movies might come up. At number 3 for me, I had this little known video game called The Last of Us.
Predictive.
Which
Predictive
is hilarious. I didn't even realize this until Brennan brought it to my attention earlier in the week that The Last of Us was my number 3. I went back and listened to this segment.
Yeah.
And I sent you a clip of it as well. So
you did.
You could have some context here. When I was talking about The Last of Us, again, this is 2016, right? I was so enthusiastic about the potential of a Last of Us film. Obviously, it came to us in the form of a TV series instead of a film. But at the time, I was so elated about the idea of a film adaptation of this video game series because it's, it's a zombie game at its core. And I certainly am, I'm not opposed to being in a post-apocalyptic world where zombies are involved. I'm definitely there for that. It has this father-daughter dynamic at play, even though they're not blood related, but there's some sort of redemption. There's everything that happens in the opening, of the game between a real father and daughter. And at the time, I had not played the game. And spoiler alert, still haven't played The Last of Us.
We're going to make that caveat a few times here, I think.
For sure. However, I bring all that up to say that while this was not top of mind for me when the series came out, was that just earlier this year that came out?
I think so.
I think so. I think that was just earlier this year. It came out and I was not, I didn't like it. Honestly, Brandon, I was not a fan.
Yeah, I was kind of with you. I liked pockets of it. The third episode with Nick Offerman, I thought was great.
Oh my gosh, that's one of the best episodes of television I've maybe ever seen.
Yeah,
like that. That episode was incredible.
Yeah, but the season that we saw, I think it works better in pockets. I think it worked better when certain episodes function more like their own short stories. As opposed to an overarching series.
And I think that's it. Like from episode to episode, there was a lot to appreciate that I really liked. I loved the performances. The performances were really great. The production design I thought was very good. I just don't think as a broader vehicle in terms of establishing lore and continuing to establish, like they establish lore that gets mostly forgotten. And until it comes back for convenience sake. And I just think there's a lot that happens within that first season that it was too uneven and emotionally distant for me. And that's the big thing. As much as I love the performances, because everything I had heard when I brought this up in 2016, oh my gosh, you're going to be emotionally obliterated by this film or this series, whatever they turn it into, the game, even if you go and play it.
Yeah.
And I mean, on the surface, I was like, everything everyone told me about it, prepare yourself, you're going to be a mess. And then I watched the series and I don't, there has to be some credence to what I'm saying because I'm still as emotional now as I've ever been. I joked about this earlier in the Patreon exclusive. I sent Brendan a thing earlier today because I'm reading, I just finished reading The Half-Blood Prince, the Harry Potter book, and now I'm reading Deathly Hallows for the first time. And I get to that part where Hedwig dies and, there's a comment about Harry and him reflecting on it. And I send this to Brendan.
Oh, with not just one, but 3 cry emojis.
So look, I'm just as emotional now as I've ever been. I got 2 kids now. So if anything, I'm double what I was in 2016.
Yeah, absolutely.
And The Last of Us show just did not connect with me emotionally at all.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you.
So I
I like the
don't know.
production value of it. I think it's a well-made
I
show.
agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And look, I know a lot of people loved it. I'm not trying to take that away from anybody. It
Mhm.
just did not work for me. And maybe that's the difference between experiencing the game and not experiencing it, because I never did play
Well,
it.
yeah,
I don't
and
know.
and and that makes for an interesting, not just an interesting conversation in its own right, but also for this particular conversation we're about to have, because you and I are not really big gamers. I guess we'll kind of admit that, right? I mean, I think
I'm
even
not a huge gamer in the sense of like these narrative cinematic games.
Mhm.
Ironically, you know what I play mostly, Brendan? NHL 24. That's what
Well,
I
see, yeah, so
play.
I guess that's, yeah, when I say gamer, I guess I'm more referring to maybe that
Like
particular
this type
realm.
of game. Yeah.
Yeah, most of the video games that we're gonna talk about here, some of them I'll admit I haven't even played, but I know enough about their
Mhm.
narratives because I've seen other people play them, and I think that
Sure.
would make a good movie.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so so there is maybe a little bit of naivete coming into this conversation, but I do think it's appropriate to introduce this naivete with regard to The Last of Us, because
Yeah.
we haven't played the game. Maybe playing the game would have helped our enjoyment of the show
It's
and filled in some of
possible.
those
Yeah.
gaps. I don't know, because yeah, when you're playing a game that narratively might feel a little incomplete, somehow you projecting yourself into that conflict helps fill in those gaps. It's like this weird
Sure.
relationship you develop with it. And
Hmm.
maybe that's something that would have helped us there.
I agree. I agree. And I can certainly understand that, because another thing I noted in our Patreon exclusive this week, again,
Mhm.
patreon.com/InSessionFilm, if you
Yep.
want to sign up and go and listen to that, because we talked about the first two episodes of Ahsoka.
Yeah.
And I love the first two episodes. And part of it is because I have experience with that character. I have
Yeah.
experience with her, not just in Clone Wars, but in Rebels. I have
Yeah.
experience with the Rebels characters, which we're now seeing in
Also,
live
her and her,
action.
her live action introduction in Mandalorian,
Absolutely.
right?
100%. So as a result, I do feel like I'm like maybe a step ahead of those that haven't experienced Ahsoka, that haven't
Yeah.
seen the Clone Wars, that haven't seen Rebels, where they might have more work to do to understand who these characters are. I know them. So when I see Rosario Dawson as live action Ahsoka with her arms folded and these long pauses, that's not a criticism to me. That's the character. Like
Yeah.
that's
That's fair.
Ahsoka Tano.
That's
Like
fair.
that's who
Yeah.
she is. And so I can see how that could be a disconnect if you've never seen Ahsoka
Right.
before.
Yeah.
And maybe there's elements of that with The Last of Us where I just can't connect with it like those that have played the game,
Hmm.
and maybe that's where that disparity comes from.
Yeah.
I don't know, but maybe I could see that being the
Yeah.
case for sure.
Well, that was a very long-winded way of saying in 2016 you had The Last of Us at your number 3.
Yes, I did. And then I also had Mass Effect and The Legend of Zelda, which you also had on your list, was The
Legend of
Legend
Zelda. Yeah.
of Zelda. Is that something that you still would like to see? Now, we picked that for very different reasons, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that something you would still like to see, though, regardless?
In the right way. Yes, I
Okay.
would love to see it in the right way. And when I say the right way, I mostly mean Illumination, don't touch it. That's mostly what I mean. After the success of Super
Fair.
Mario Brothers, I have heard rumblings that Illumination is very interested in the Zelda property, and
Yeah, we talked about that earlier in the year, I think.
we did,
Briefly.
yeah. So
Briefly.
this could be white noise for any active listeners of the show who may remember this conversation.
Yeah.
I just don't think the lore and the mythology of Zelda goes hand in hand with Illumination sensibilities. I understood,
Yeah.
like I didn't love the Super Mario Brothers movie, but I
Yeah, it was
understood
fine.
why Illumination wanted to make it, because it actually does fit in their tonal and aesthetic wheelhouse. Like it makes sense. I just wish it was more of a Mario movie as opposed to just being an Illumination movie that featured Mario Brothers, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But it does fit their wheelhouse. Zelda, I
Yeah.
don't think does. Now, I would still love to see a Zelda property, perhaps a movie in some form. I'm trying to recall when we did that top 3 back in 2016. I was pretty adamant that if you're going to do a Zelda movie, you specifically adapt the N64 game Ocarina of Time,
Mhm.
which I don't know if I would agree with myself on that anymore. I
Okay.
think with regard to that, if you know the story of Ocarina of Time, part of the charm of that story is that it features our hero of time, Link, but it features him in 2 different timelines. He goes back and forth in a 7-year period. So I was kind of thinking of the Richard Linklater effect. Like, what if you got the same actors to play a role and then waited 7 years to finish that, and you just kind of see this sudden shift in this arc?
Yeah.
Which I still think is a pretty cool idea, but part of what I think is so interesting about video games in general is sort of the interactive relationship that people have with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in a way, I think I would like to see that somehow relate to the movies as well. And something that's so fascinating about Zelda is the mythology is very confusing, deliberately so. It has at least 3 different timelines, and whenever a new game comes out, part of the charm is not really knowing where it fits in with the timeline. Exactly, yeah, because they more or less all tell a lot like the same story, but they're different incarnations of the same characters. So it's got this weird religiosity to it. So if you were to make a Zelda movie, my thought would be just make a new original story, and then the fans can try and decide where it fits in at the timeline. I think that would be a neat way to do it. But yeah, long story short, I would still be interested in seeing Zelda attempted as a live action or even an animation movie. Like Studio Ghibli can do this. Like it's totally in their wheelhouse.
I would love to see it just because the mythology and the lore is so rich and Link is such a compelling character that I think there's so much to mine out of something like Zelda. It's almost astonishing that we haven't seen it in any sort of major way.
I know why. It's because it's the same reason why we haven't seen a Mario Brothers movie in so long. The creators of these games, as well as Nintendo,
very protective.
They're very protective, and they have every right to be. And to be honest, Zelda is kind of a tricky one to do. You mentioned Link being a very compelling character. What makes him so compelling is the fact that he's not really that compelling at all. He's kind of a blank slate. Like he doesn't even speak in these games. So there's going to be this fight from fans to remain loyal to that ethos of the character. So it makes me think, like, do you make the character silent in the movie if you were to adapt it? Like, can you actually pull that off? So there's a trickiness to The Legend of Zelda that I can see someone having a hard time with.
Well, to, I guess, clarify my comments a little bit, what I find so compelling is how he connects to that mythos and lore.
Fair.
And the aesthetics of the character. Because you're right, there's not much to him in terms of characterization, but that's why I wanted to use the phrase, there's so much to mine out of it still.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We don't really know about much about him beyond that connection to the lore. And so, yeah, there's a ton of untapped potential there that could be fascinating. I don't know if there's a way to do it where you keep him vague and broad and ambiguous. I don't know if that
I think
would
there's
work.
a way. I don't know what that way is, but I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there's always an answer to a certain problem. There really is.
That could be the case. I will also say this: if they want to completely manufacture the character from scratch, and while still keeping that connection to the lore and the mythos the same, but you make, you bring some humanity to them that we've never experienced in the games. If you want to make that up, and again, coming down to execution, you make it interesting and compelling. I'm not against that. But if you also want to try to figure out the ambiguity, I mean, I'm not against that either. But I would absolutely be down to see a Zelda game, or a Zelda film.
Yeah.
But it also might come down to, again, who is doing this?
Exactly.
Because as we just talked about with Rebel Moon, Zack Snyder isn't the one that's going to fancy me when it comes to science fiction, based off of what I saw with Rebel Moon.
Yeah.
That trailer, I mean, it's stealing. It's thievery. It's flat out thievery. So I don't want a Zack Snyder doing A Legend of Zelda. Does that make sense?
So it might depend
on the.
You're right. It depends on the who, and the what, funding it, right? So that's a big question that needs to be answered.
So here's another one that I thought of when trying to figure out some new games to bring to this conversation, because we talked about The Last of Us, we talked about Zelda the last time around. One game that we did not mention, and honestly, I'm not sure when it came out. This might have come out after the fact. I really have no idea.
Okay.
But the game is Horizon Zero Dawn, developed by Guerrilla Games, published by Sony Interactive Entertainment.
I haven't played this one.
I haven't played this one either, but I think it's really fascinating and has a lot of potential for a few reasons. It's the story is set in post-apocalyptic United States in the 31st century. It equally has some really interesting lore that I think would be appealing on the big screen. It has some interesting science fiction to it with these deadly robotic machines at play. But there's also a primitive component to it, as well as there are these 4 sections, these 4 tribes, if you will, that make up this post-apocalyptic setting in the United States, and all of them have their own various distinctions. So that duality of sci-fi deadly robots and also primitive living, I think, is a fascinating duality and dichotomy there. And then you have the central protagonist of Aloy. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but she's this mysterious, fiercely independent female character who goes on this coming of age journey. And of course, she's also a queer character as well. I think that would make it, something very new for this genre of movie. And what I thought about as far as cinema goes, I think this could be like this decade, assuming that it would come out in the 2020s here. I think it could be this decade's Hunger Games. Because the Hunger Games also has this rustic, primitive element with the depictions of the districts, right? But there's also the futuristic that comes with the Capitol. And then we have Katniss being our hero of those movies. So there's a lot of parallels to be drawn between Katniss and Aloy and how we follow them through this journey of finding themselves. Now, I think there's still so much different about the game from what I've been reading that it would not be a Hunger Games regurgitation, but fundamentally like broad talking points. You have that same kind of dichotomy of primitive and futuristic setting, and a central female protagonist kind of carrying the weight of the drama and emotion.
Right.
So it's something that the studios can use as a blueprint. Hey, remember when the Hunger Games were huge in the 2010s? Let's maybe use that as a blueprint, but for this adaptation of Horizon Zero Dawn, which has garnered a lot of praise for its story, for its character, for its world building. I've never played the game. I know there's been a lot of talk about it. I know it's received a lot of acclaim. But it sounds to me so fascinating. And maybe it's because I love the Hunger Games so much that when I was doing some research and reading through this, I kept thinking of the Hunger Games, that duality, Katniss. There's a lot of similarities there, but also it's very different. Like ultimately it's very different in terms of the world building and what it's aiming to do thematically. So I that was something that came to mind that I think would be fascinating on the big screen.
Yeah, admittedly, I'm very ignorant to this one. Like I said, I haven't played it. I know of its reputation. I know vaguely some of those narrative beats that you're talking about, but other than that, I'm very unfamiliar with most of it. But I have heard great things about the game. So to hear what you're saying there as far as the cinematics of it, I guess, could certainly be translatable. But I didn't think about that one because, like I said, I just don't know enough about it.
Sure.